This is William from Exploding Word Ministries. Today I'd like to do a short study on John 2 verses 1 to 11. It's a story which you're all familiar with. It's called the wedding in Cana. So what do I want to talk to you about? Well, first of all, I want us to look at what actually happened. Jesus and a small number of his disciples had been invited to attend a family wedding. Now, we say a family wedding because Mary's response within the wedding when there was a problem indicates she wasn't just an ordinary guest. So this was more likely to be either a cousin's wedding or maybe even one of the siblings of Jesus was getting married. We don't know exactly, so we can't go into that until we're into detail. But let's look at what happens. Jesus and the disciples are at the wedding in Cana. John records for us that this was the first miracle that Jesus did in his public ministry, and it's the only John who brings this particular incident to light to us. We don't have it in any of the other three Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke. Interestingly enough, though, this reflects back to the temptations of Christ. You remember in the temptation of Christ that the first thing Satan did was to ask Jesus, because he had been fasting for 40 days, to turn some stones into bread so that he could eat. A natural thing for the body, affecting the body. What Satan was doing, he was using the temptation of Christ's flesh and the hunger that he would be experiencing to influence him into using his authority as the Son of God. Excuse me, his authority as the Son of God to feed his own body, to meet his own needs rather than do the work of God. And that was part and parcel of why Jesus didn't do it. It wasn't that it would have been wrong for him to change the stones into bread, but rather it would have been wrong for him to do it simply to meet his own needs. And that was the difference. He would have been using it incorrectly. So why is that relevant to this particular story in John 2? Excuse me. You've got a frog in the throat, as we say over here. A bit annoying when it happens, but it does happen from time to time. However, let's go into this and explore this a little more detail. The wedding Jewish weddings generally are over a period of time, not like our weddings. When I got married, my wedding reception lasted about 3 hours and we had dancing afterwards and stuff like that, but that was it. In other words, over the period of one day, it started, it finished, and that was done. But for the Jewish concept of a wedding, it can take a week to actually go through the whole aspect of the celebrations. So there's a lot of more activity, a lot of more background information going on here. So when we talk about a Jewish wedding in this line, at this cultural time in history, we realize that we're talking a big celebration for a lot of people over a prolonged period. And so it was necessary, when you invited people to come to your wedding, to be able to be hospitable, offer them food and drink to meet all their needs, because it was a time of celebration. But there was two reasons why this was very, very important, and we need to look at those and understand it within the concept of this story. Today, when you get married, there is legal paperwork that has to be produced or signed off and witnessed to say that you are officially married. This is something that you can ask for at any point in your further life, and it just proves that you are a married individual. That didn't, however, exist in Jesus' day. And so the only way you could prove that you were married was the witnesses who had attended your wedding. Now, you might say, well, if you move to a different place, what's the difference? And true, I grant you, in vast majority of cultures, it was accepted that you were married. Simply, if you told them you were married, people didn't argue that point all that much. But in the Jewish consistency, there was this little problem. You see, if you were living in a relationship that could be construed as, how can I put it, sinful? Yeah, I think we'll go with that. In other words, if you were perceived as being married while not married, therefore you were committing adultery, or at the least fornication, and in which case you are subject to being stoned, put to death. It was a problem. So you needed to be able to prove that you were married. And to do that, the only way you could do that was to have witnesses. And this is why we do have witnesses today for that purpose. Every wedding has to be witnessed, that other people can stand over it and say, yeah, I was there, I saw it, I'm there to witness this. But in the Jewish culture, your witnesses had to be still around for as long as the marriage was going to be around, for this problem could crop up. So the more people you had at your marriage, the more people you involved, the less opportunity there was of an allegation being made against you, and you being brought before, say, the Sanhedrin if you were in Jerusalem, and being accused of adultery. So these are the things that you have to take into consideration. These are the things that you have to work with. The other alternative to this, or other aspect of this, was that you might have an individual who, in truth, was already married and there was witnesses, but they were having a relationship with somebody else. And when that was spotted, because there was witnesses to their previous marriage, or to their marriage, then the allegations would go, I know I was at their wedding, this isn't her husband, therefore we can stone her. That sort of thing. So we have that concept continually coming up across this within Judaism. So the wedding's very, very important. But one of the things you want is for the bride, is for the guests to remember the wedding well. And to do that, you give them a good time. You want them talking about your wedding and recalling your wedding right down through the ages. So to do that, what generally was conceived was you give them a good time. So when Mary comes to Jesus and said they ran out of wine, this is a big problem. How Jesus responds to it, though, is very interesting. He doesn't get up. He doesn't raise his voice. He merely tells the stewards, who Mary has also told, do whatever he asks you to do. He says to them, go and fill the water jugs. Now the water jugs were ceremonially washing jugs. In other words, they were filled with water so the Jews could wash their hands after every meal that they had, every portion of the meal. And it was a continual process, and they would wash and cleanse themselves and all the rest. Judging by the amount of water that was at the jugs and the things, this was quite a large wedding because they would have kept using it. It is estimated that there was somewhere in the region of about 150 gallons of water used at this one wedding, from what information we can take out of the Bible. So when Jesus says fill it with water to the very top, we must understand what's going on here. These servants have filled with water ceremonial hand washing jugs. These are considered unclean. I know they're for washing, but they're unclean. It's not water designed or used for drinking. It's water used for the purpose of washing away dirt from your hands. So therefore, their use determines that they are unclean. So the first thing is, that's the water Jesus says we're going to use. Fill those jugs, get them ready. So something that is considered unclean, it isn't really unclean, but it's considered unclean, is used. The second thing is, Jesus says, take some of that and go and give it to the master of the feast. In other words, the guy organizing the whole thing. He is a unique individual. Everybody else here are members of the neighborhood, the family, friends, etc. This one isn't. His job is to ensure that the wedding goes according to plan. He is over every aspect of it. That everybody gets food, that everybody's met with the right things, that everybody is looked after. He coordinates everything. And so it's his job to oversee and ensure that everything's going well. It's a good job. He does it on a regular basis. He would have been a professional, and his idea would have been to get the best out of it. Now, the interesting thing about this was he was in a habit of carrying, traditionally, a small amount of wine that he would have kept in like a hip flask when it's the wee thing that he attached to his belt. Now the reason for that was because as you got towards the end of a wedding feast, the wine quality kind of drops. So while at the start of the feast it was good wine, and every day you wanted to keep enough good wine to keep the whole thing going for the rest of the day, for the rest of the time. Then as people started to get a little bit worse for wear, as each wine's brought out, he'd have to test it, and he would be aware that the quality is going down because, unlike them, he's not intoxicated. But he kept a good bit of good wine with himself so that he could taste that. So when these servants come and present him with what they think is water, and he tastes it, he's expecting this to be bad wine. He's expecting this to be the worst wine he's ever tasted. But it turns out this is the best wine he has ever tasted in his entire life. He has never seen the like of it before. It is brilliant, wonderful wine. He's so impressed that he goes to the groom and says, "You got it wrong, you know. In all my years and experience, I can tell you that you're supposed to serve the bad wine last, so that when the people have a little bit of drink in them, their palates are not just as good at detecting it. But you went and you've served the best wine for the last. You've kept the best to last." This was a very unusual thing, but it resonated with every one of the servants who knew that the water had been water that they had poured into it. The wine was great, approximately 150 gallons. Today, that would be about 750 average bottles. Imagine 750 average bottles of the highest quality wine. Now that's a wedding gift. I think you all agree. So the wedding in Cana tells us quite a lot of things. But Jesus used his power, his authority to change water into wine when he didn't use that same power and authority to turn stones into bread for himself. He did it because of a need within a family circumstance, because people who needed to be able to keep face, to allow the celebration to go on. It was a gift of extravagance. It was a use of the power, but within love, and therefore justifiable. And John wanted us to understand that. Jesus is a God who meets our needs, even when we don't recognize that the needs can be so extravagant. This is William Andrews, Exploding Word Ministries, thanking you for listening, and catch the next one. See you then.